Thank you very much. Thanks for coming this morning to this presentation. The first thing I want to mention is I was born and raised in Toronto, Canada, hockey capital of the world, and I want to congratulate the St. Rita hockey team. You folks did wonderful. Keep up the good work. This is the Shakis family, a letter sent from Siberia. It's written by Oduta, and she's thanking her aunt who lives in Chicago for the parcels that they received. She received some shoes. The families who were deported to Siberia survived in large part because of the support that they received from their relatives in other countries. And at the end of this little note, she's very happy, and she says, don't worry about us, I'm healthy, and I'm the second best student in the second grade. So she is very proud of her accomplishment. The Hope and Spirit project I started up 2 years ago, which is located at the Balzakas Museum on South Pulaski, commemorates the beginnings of the mass deportations by Stalin of people to Siberia. They started in June of 1941. And just earlier this month, the Parliament of the European Union made a proclamation requesting international cooperation to commemorate the largest wave of mass deportations, which took place at the end of March in 1949. And that's how this talk is taking place today. And we're participating in this international event. My entire adult life, both in Canada and the United States, I've been bothered by what I call historical imbalance. The fact that people in North America know about Hitler and Hitler's atrocities, but know very little about what Stalin did. And on a personal note, my own family relatives, my great-grandfather, both my grandfathers and one aunt died as a consequence of NKVD interrogation. They're basically murdered. And 8 relatives of mine, blood relatives, were deported to Siberia. This is my grandmother. She's 71 years of age when she was deported for 8 years in Siberia. A simple farm woman, raising kids, taking care of a small farm. And her job was to be a lumberjack. And she's sitting here by the trees that she had been toiling at. Well, she wasn't very good at handling an axe. And she, within a few weeks of this photograph being taken, injured herself, chopped herself in the leg. She was barely able to walk. And she was reassigned to another job, taking care of a bunch of children who were there, deported with their families. So she was very fortunate. She ended up in a situation where she had access to heat in the winter and food. They prepared food for the kids. And so she survived. When I met her, she told me that every winter, 1/3 of the residents would die from starvation. The permafrost was so solid that the bodies were stacked up like logs, waiting until the spring thaw before they could bury anybody. In Lithuania, several 100,000 people were deported, died. Across Europe and Russia, the casualties, historians have various estimates, but it's between 10 to 20 million, and oftentimes you hear the number 15 million people died because of Stalin's atrocities. To put this in perspective, the Holocaust claimed 6 million lives. Not only is there this historical imbalance that people don't know it, but when you look at the justice served, it's a massive imbalance. The perpetrators of the Nazi atrocities were rounded up and started off, the justice started up the Nuremberg trials shortly after World War II. And the apprehension of these criminals has not stopped. They're still being looked for right now. I think I'd be very accurate to tell you how many people were brought to justice who committed Stalin's atrocities. And I think the very accurate number is 0. So the imbalance in justice. These people who committed these atrocities are pretty much all passed away. There's a handful of them left, very elderly people. So the chance for justice came and went. I was bothered with this my entire life, and about 2 years ago sat down with Stanley Balzakas at the museum, talked to him about it, and he said, okay, let's do a project. Let's start on it. So I started working on it, and 2 years later, we're sort of finishing up with this entire event. A lot of the material that we have on display at the museum came from the archives at the Lithuanian Research and Study Center, and these are the individuals who helped out with that. I won't get into how this exhibit got set up. It's a long story, and it was really very difficult and very complex to get this thing accomplished. We started with nothing and started piecing things together bit by bit by bit by little. And now, the title Hope and Spirit, the project, we're commemorating deportation and death. We could have called it that, but that would have been a rather sad title to use, and people would have been turned off by it. The thing is that people did survive very adverse circumstances. Out of my own blood relatives, the 8 that were deported, 7 survived. Only 1 died in Siberia, and they returned to Lithuania. Their spirit kept them alive. Their hope for the future kept them alive, and they were able to return. That same hope and spirit in the Lithuanian people, many decades later, manifested itself with the independence of Lithuania. And if you know history, Lithuania was at the center of the fall of the Soviet Empire. Lithuania was the first country to break off, declare independence in 1990, and all the other people followed afterwards. So the hope and spirit survived decades of repression and flowered eventually. It couldn't be suppressed. Now, the entire program that we did is a very complex one, involved a lot of things. The most moving thing were people who grew up in Siberia, who were deported with their families, with their personal recollections, many book signings, many films about Siberia related to that thing we've shown, readings of letters from Siberia, performance of songs, poetry, and then the exhibit itself. But before we get into aspects of the exhibit, I want to go over the history of what happened at that time, certain aspects of it, and more importantly, why is it important to us? It's not simply correcting some details, footnotes in history textbooks. It really is relevance to today's world. This is Moscow, August 1939, August 23rd. This fellow is Molotov. He's working with Stalin, Joseph Stalin, the head of the Soviet Union. It's the same Molotov of Molotov cocktail thing. And if you know Molotov cocktails, they're not a drink. They're rather destructive items. This is Ribbentrop. He's representing Hitler. They're signing a mutual non-aggression pact. And in other words, we will protect each other. We will not attack each other. Now, I'll ask you a question, you know history. Who were the allies of World War II? I'm sure you all have the wrong answer. It's not, the real allies were not Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin. The real allies of World War II were Hitler and Stalin. Those were the allies. Okay? Not only was this a non-aggression pact, but then the details worked out. They supported each other militarily, with arms, with food, with aid and assistance. And so that and it started, this thing, so World War II actually started here, August 23rd. 1 week later, on September 1st, because of this aggression, this pact, Hitler invaded Poland. So that's the historical start of World War II, is when Hitler invades Poland. But it actually was all set up a week before. This protocol was all very secret, and it came to light many decades later. This is now a month later, in September. Ribbentrop is back in Moscow to work out details with Stalin. And after this, the work took place, they had a cocktail reception. And during that cocktail reception, Stalin raised a glass, clicked it to Ribbentrop's glass, and this is literally what Stalin said. I know how much the German nation loves their leader, so I would like to drink to his health. Stalin and Hitler were best friends. And symbolically, this is a map of Europe. And in September, you'll see the date here, September 28, 1939. And since they divided Europe between them, Ribbentrop, Stalin, signatures on it, very symbolic. Now getting to so that's how this thing started. And the killing machine of Hitler fed the killing machine of Stalin, and they interacted, both of them. Now, the deportations that took place in Lithuania, across Eastern Europe, and in Russia were of 2 general types. Now, the deportation started in 1940, continued until 1953, the death of Stalin. And over that 14-year time period, things changed. There were variations. much depended on where people were deported to, so that, but just sort of summarizing this time period, there were two general types. One was the hard labor prison camps. And this was usually men and people who had some kind of affiliation to the government, or to the military or to the police. Now, if they weren't out and out killed, most of these people were killed by NKVD, but if they weren't that much of a threat, they were deported to these hard labor prison camps. And this is where you have the barbed wire, you have the prison towers, you have the walls built up, again, barbed wire, walls separating. These are photographs by a fellow, Jozef Kozlauskas, they're up in the exhibit. He himself was, with his mother, was deported at the age of 7, and he was there for 8 years until 15 years of age. He's a photographer, and much later in life, in 1988 to 1989, when travel restrictions were being lifted, he and other people returned to the places where they were deported, and he photo-documented these things. This is a woman who was incarcerated in Siberia, returning to the cell where she was kept as a prisoner. Here, 2 women were in the cell, returned to Siberia to visit the site. And here's a gentleman where he was incarcerated. Now, about 150,000 people from Lithuania alone suffered that fate. The death rate was extremely high under those circumstances. The other 150,000 approximately were under much less restricted circumstances. There weren't barbed wire, there weren't guns as much, and it was basically to use you as slave labor. And the details of how the lifestyle that they had in Siberia was very varied over this time period, but none of it was very good. All of these people were criminals. And what was their crime? They owned something. They were part of the bourgeoisie. They were part of the society that needed to be eliminated. And the bourgeoisie, people have something, either you kill them outright or you deport them, get rid of them. And ownership, you own a violin, well, that's pretty bad stuff. A piano, definite deportation. Education, you're a physician, you're a teacher, you're an accountant, you're a threat, you're going to be deported. But by far the biggest category in this deportation was people who were farmers, small family farms. And I emphasize the word small because in North America, these kind of things you'd call hobbyist farmers, the amount of land that they had. Where my father and grandfather were from, the Theopolis farm, at harvest time, they would hire about 10 people to come in and help them. They had full-time about 2 people working. The harvest was all done by hand. You have a sickle and you do it by hand. They didn't have tractors. And so you can imagine how much land 10 people, a dozen people can do working with it. It's not large, or very small. But they had something, and that was enough to get you killed, enough to get you sent to Siberia. These pictures are extremely rare. There's very few pictures exist of the actual deportation. I think in Lithuania there's only 2 images that exist. These are trains, cattle cars that were used to transport animals. People are here being loaded into the cattle cars. And you can tell this is the same one, the number is the same, the insignia on the cattle car is the same. They're being loaded up, and here they're loaded in. You see their faces looking out, and they've been locked away. And guards, military standing there, packed people up. People were loaded in like sardines in a can. These deportations, 75% were women and children, the rest were elderly. And these are some of the trains that were involved in the deportation in 1988-89 that this fellow Kozlauskas photographed. Now this is a map of the vast expanse of Siberia. This is Lithuania and the Baltic republics up here, Europe is up here, and you see how really big this entire territory is. By train, the vast majority of people were deported to this area here. This is Lake Baikal. This is just west of Lake Baikal to this area. Other people, so that's the vast majority. Other people were put on boats and barges and went up the Lena River, up to the Laptev Sea, which is part of the Arctic Ocean, up in this area. This is the Arctic Circle, past the Arctic Circle, and these were very, very difficult circumstances. Now, in terms of this trip, this would take a month or longer to cross it, and it's very hard to imagine the horror of this just to travel. Many people dying along the way, bodies just being left along the railroad tracks. And there's an infamous hole in the floor where all the people in the car, in the railroad car, had just one hole in the floor for all bodily functions. It was horror, really a horrible thing. It's very hard to imagine these conditions. Very little food provided, very little water provided. And what was the work that these basically slave labor did? Well, forestry was primarily the biggest one, mining, agriculture, and in the far north on the Arctic Ocean, fishing. Now, I'm getting to the point, why is this important? There is relevance today. It's not simply fixing historical facts and details in textbooks. History repeats itself. And if you don't remember it actively, things that happened really not that long ago, they will repeat themselves. The Jewish community internationally has done a wonderful job to remember the Holocaust, what happened. There's Holocaust museums internationally, there's films, movies, things that, so people know it, you know all about it. Despite that fact, despite the fact of the Holocaust being known so well, you actually have leaders of countries who not only deny it, but they actively want to do it on a bigger scale. Okay? So despite these efforts, still you have that kind of effort, history wanting to repeat itself. And with Stalin's efforts not receiving the attention, the danger is even greater. Why? Where is the threat of recurrence of Stalinism taking place? One thing is the entire Soviet empire. There is a nostalgia for the good old days. Now, the country was steeped in slave labor. And the people, and if you look at the quality of life on the collective farms in the Soviet Union, it wasn't very good. It was pretty dismal. And you may want to consider that almost slave labor. But if you do, then you're talking hundreds of millions of people in very bad situations across, not just the people deported, but the general population in addition. Well, that workforce produced wealth. And that wealth was available. And that wealth was distributed. And in a society where everyone is equal there, okay, communism, you had people that live a good life. Of course, they're equal, but they live a good life, and the slaves are slaves, but they're fine, they're equal too. It's all on paper, not in reality. Now, with the fall of the empire, these people who grew up in luxury, relative luxury, so a lot of them will be my age. Their kids, like college graduates, recent college, they know about the good life. They heard about it. They don't have it. They want to go back to the good old days. And so there's a nostalgia for it. And in terms of some specific countries that never left the Soviet, even though they became independent, one country is Belarus. And that has been run as a Stalinist dictatorship forever. When it became an independent country in 1990, it still has been running as a Stalinist dictatorship. So these things do exist. But let's take a look at something that just happened recently, earlier this month, to give an insight into this nostalgia for the good old days. You have to look in Russia. Okay, that's where Stalinism, Leninism came from and into the world. Elections took place, presidential elections, March 2nd. 64% of the vote, popular vote, went for Vladimir Putin. Now you can argue whether he represents democracy or not. But I'm not going to get into that issue. What is important are the details which don't appear in the press. I didn't see any of this. You have to go do some digging to find this out. 18% of the popular vote went for Gennady Zyuganov. He got the second largest number of votes, okay, right after Putin. And he's the head of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation. A year ago, he opened, this just represents his and the party's attitude. Open letter to President Medvedev demanded re-Stalinization of Russia. Literally, this is what he demanded. This is a Stalinist party. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. They're proud about it. They want Stalin back out of the grave. They want Stalin back to do the good things, the good work that Stalin did. They want it back. 6% of the vote went for Zhirinovsky, of the Liberal Democratic Party of Russia. And famously, this party is neither liberal nor is it democratic. And he wants, this party platform, wants all of the Soviet territory reestablished where it was before the fall of the empire. Russian language imposed everywhere as the only language allowed in the entire country. Well, this is a Stalinism with a slightly different flavor to it. If you put these two fellows together, 18% and 6% together, you really have 24% of adults in Russia right now want Stalin back. That's astounding. 1 out of 4 voting adults want Stalinism back again. That shows in the nostalgia. When you have 24% of the population, that could trip into a majority relatively easily. And that's not even getting into discussions about Vladimir Putin at all, and whether he represents democracy or not. And if you ignore Putin, you only have 12% of the votes went for truly people that represent democracy. Let's look at a slightly neighboring country, China. This just happened on March 16th this year. And this is Mr. Bo Xilai. His father was a founder of the People's Republic of China, worked with Mao very closely. He was, until March 16th, the party secretary in the city Chongqing and the district, 35 million people. He was a member of the 25-member Politburo. He was this guy's very popular, very charismatic, just Mr. Popularity in China, not just in his area, but across, and catapulted himself up into the Politburo, and he was in line to be in the ruling 9 when changes are taking place later this year. And from the ruling 9, his trajectory could have been right straight up into the being ruler of China. Now why, and he was fired from his jobs March 16th. Why is this guy so important in this talk today? The reason is, he is a hard-line Maoist. He wants the Cultural Revolution to come back. Okay? It's this nostalgia for the good old days in China, rearing itself up, catapulted this person up into the highest levels of government, with a threat possibly to take over even the rulers of China. They had to get rid of him. Now, just to remind you, what happened in the Cultural Revolution? What is this thing? Well, it was started by Mao. It went for 10 years. Historians don't have access to the actual numbers, so these things are speculative. And it's estimated to be 1 to 20 million people were killed during the Cultural Revolution. 100 million were persecuted, lost their jobs, lost their possessions, lost everything, put into re-education camps. If you have some sympathy for the difficulties in Tibet now, well, they're sort of in heaven now compared to what happened in this decade. This was active destruction of religion, trying to eradicate religion entirely out of China, and 6,000 Tibetan monasteries were destroyed. When you look now, you folks are going to be looking at colleges eventually. Well, in this time period, colleges didn't exist anymore. They were shut down. The bourgeois element had to be gotten rid of society. College education, it just enforces bourgeois. It enforces the people who have it. We have to be all equal. Basically, university education stopped for a decade. The economy, no progress, everything went into tailspin. China was heading back into the Stone Age because of this kind of cultural revolution. Mr. Bo thinks this is great. Mr. Bo wants to do that. Last night, Associated Press, late last night, came out since Mr. Bo has been deposed, other people now are coming forward and talking about what's happened in that city. And it turns out that in the past 10 months, he started up his own cultural revolution in the city. He's had 5,000 people arrested, incarcerated, tried as corrupt. He's had several hundred people executed. The people that he's picking on are primarily business leaders, judges, and political opponents. It sounds very familiar. Anybody who has something, business leaders, or could be opponents, going to be either put away or executed. One person who was in the city there says that he has started up a Red Terror. So not only did he believe in principle in the Cultural Revolution, but in the past year he actually started implementing it And he was on a trajectory. He could have taken over China and restarted all these policies. Fortunately, that didn't happen. These sentiments are very real. Well, let's get to something in a neighboring area, which even has more importance, in a sense. A person told me to check into this recently, and I sort of just did a Google search and put in the right words. On the first 2 pages of Google search, a whole bunch of newspaper magazine articles showed up, publications that I don't know anything about. But amongst them, you have articles written by the Washington Post, New York Times, the Daily Mail from London, ABC News Online, and these are all just within the past year, and National Post from Toronto. And what we're dealing with here is active Stalinism. Did you know that right now there are 200,000 political prisoners in slave labor camps, right now? Did you know that human experimentation is taking place on these slaves? You thought that ended with World War II. No, it's still ongoing right now. Did you know that gas chambers are in active use in these camps? They are. It's astounding. You thought that ended World War II. It's there. It's Stalinism, and that never stopped. And what am I talking about? North Korea. This is taking place in North Korea. This is the National Post from Toronto, just early February, satellite images of these camps, death camps. And according to the National Post, the data they can get, it seems that with the new administration in North Korea, the son took over presidency, with the new administration, the number of people in the camps is actually increasing. They're increasing the arrests and putting people away. Now, this book's coming out just in a couple of days. This fella, Mr. Shin Dong-yuk, was born in a prison camp, and at the age of 23 decided to risk his life and escape. And he went across North Korea into China, and then finally got his way into South Korea and into the United States. And he was interviewed by Blaine Hardin, and the book's coming out about life in these camps. It's coming out. There have been a couple of books written about the subject, but this one's going to be particularly a good one, worth, I think, attention. And this is Blaine Hardin. He used to be a correspondent for the Washington Post, New York Times, and currently works for The Economist and for PBS. Now, the question comes up frequently, why? Why is it that we know all about Hitler and we don't know about Stalin that much? Well, there are 2 answers to this question. One thing, when World War II came to an end, the war's over. Many casualties, lots of people, died. The economy was affected severely. People want to get back to a normal life. There's joy. The war's over. Let's celebrate. And Stalin was an ally. He helped win the war. So we're not going to go after our friends and allies. Well, despite him being a friend, his military aggressions weren't forgotten. He took over all of Eastern Europe, and he wasn't giving it up. The army was going to stay there. And that quickly led to the Cold War that evolved very quickly after that. The Berlin Wall was built, all these things took place. But still, nobody was going to dig back into what he was doing in his own country. The other big reason is secrecy. Neither Hitler nor Stalin thought that these kind of death camps were something to bring international journalists to show off. These things were, obviously a tremendous embarrassment that they were doing these mass killings. They did everything in secret, as secret as possible. But Hitler lost the war. The armies took over and liberated the people who were still alive in Auschwitz and all the other concentration camps. Eisenhower, General Eisenhower subsequently, President Eisenhower, issued an order to the photographers of the military to photo document everything as much as possible. He said that if we don't document it now, what happened, people will say in the future this never happened, and history will repeat itself. So that's why we have all of the images, the horror images from what Hitler accomplished, because he lost the war and there was access to it. Now, this never happened with Stalin. Stalin didn't, and he kept up secretly doing these things as much as possible. And then the next question is, how is it that Stalin did maybe double or triple the number of killings? than Hitler did. Well, he had many more years to do it. When Hitler started up on the idea of concentration camps, on methods of mass murder, he sent Gestapo agents to Stalin, because Stalin already had death machine in operation, how to do mass killings, and was doing it at that time. And Hitler's concentration camps were modeled on Stalin's, actually, and actually improved on the Stalin model. And then after the war ended in 1945, and this stuff continued until Stalin's death in 1953. So there were many more years that he was able to inflict these casualties. That's why the difference. Now, in the summer 2 years ago, I know this history, I know this background. It seemed that nobody in North America knows about it but me. I sort of felt like the voice in the wilderness when I started this project up. But a number of things came up because I wasn't the only one bothered by this. Timothy Snyder, he's a professor of history at Yale University. At the end of October, published a book comparing the killing machines of Hitler and Stalin. This is the first time that an American historian has addressed this issue head on. And actually, we were able to get him here in Chicago, and I introduced him for a book signing, and he did a very wonderful talk. Ruta Šepetis from Memphis, Tennessee, Lithuanian descent, wrote a book about a teenage girl, 15-year-old girl, deported with her family into Siberia and the horrors of it. I mentioned to you the cattle car thing and how horrible it was, and how you can imagine it. Well, that was just a few sentences. You take those few sentences, okay, and change it into 80 pages of what happened to her. This is in this book. Then you have a real sense of the horror that took place, just the transportation part of it. She's going to be here a month from now, and I'll be introducing her at a book signing at the museum. When this book came out, just like Bloodlands, it hit the New York Times bestseller list. Bloodlands was Book of the Year by The Economist immediately. This book also hit New York Times bestseller list. And when it came out by Penguin Books, which is the biggest book publisher in the world, it came out in 24 foreign languages simultaneously. Now it's in 30 languages translated. And Ruth is very busy running around the world with book signings over there. The most remarkable thing is Hollywood. Peter Weir. If you've seen the movie The Truman Story, I think, that's his film, put out a film, The Way Back, about Siberian deportations and escape from Siberia. This is the first time Hollywood addressed this issue. And this film actually won an Academy Award. It's not the recent Academy Awards, but it was a year ago that they won it. And if you think of the number of films about Hitler and the Holocaust that took place, you know, this is the first time that Hollywood has addressed this particular Stalin thing. Hopefully there'll be more of these. So I've tried to address this issue as best I can. Other people, in their ways, historians, people, novelists, you have Hollywood people addressing this historical imbalance. And I'm sort of very satisfied that we've been able to accomplish at least a little bit here. And the Lithuanian press in Chicago certainly covered this a lot. We had the American press here, particularly Chicago Tribune. Bill Hageman's article was a very, very nice one, and other things here, very, very nice coverage. WBEZ, we had a 15-minute radio coverage on it, which ended up in All Things Considered in NPR. American Historical Society had their annual meeting here in early January, and they requested a tour of the exhibit. They'd heard about it, so that was kind of neat. And the board of directors of the Illinois Humanities Council had read the Tribune article and decided to do their annual meeting at the museum so I could give them a tour of this thing which they read about. So that's all rather satisfying. Still, there's one thing really missing off this list. There's no television at all. Can't have everything. This is Southtown Star, front page. Really in your face, get your attention about what happened. Streetwise. These are sold by people who are underemployed in Chicago. And the front page, there's a very beautiful 4-page article, very nicely written, with very nice illustrations. They did a wonderful job with it. So we got the word out. Now, let me see what time we have. Not much. I'll go into the, just give you a brief tour of the exhibit itself. What's available. Exhibit continues to the end of April, so if you want to go see it, it's available 6500 South Pulaski Road. When you get off the elevator, this is on the 3rd floor. You're in the elevator looking out, you see posters, children deported to Siberia, the guard towers, and some historical posters. Again, looking in one direction, you see the same site. We put some barbed wire up for effect. And then looking into the exhibit, we have the historical posters here, and then the other artifacts. Historical posters. These were obtained, purchased from the Genocide Museum in Lithuania. They're both in English and Lithuanian in terms of historical information. And then the actual artifacts, letters, photographs, envelopes, other material from Siberia that people sent from Siberia and to the deportees brought back. Another view of these displays. We have over 200 photographs, 200 letters, 100 envelopes, and many other artifacts related to it. We organized a children's art exhibit. We realized children of Lithuanian descent were not learning about this experience, about their background history. So we asked them to, across North America, to talk to their parents or grandparents about the deportation and do something about it, to do a work of art. And so they sent it in. 52 kids sent in works of art. We had a committee jury them and award prizes. And these are just some of the pieces that were sent from New Jersey, Wisconsin, Toronto, Indiana. And in the background here, it's hard to see, but actually what she's painted in are faces of people in the darkness. From Toronto, Cleveland, Madison, Wisconsin, New Jersey, locally here. Vista, California, that's between Los Angeles and San Diego, locally. And this one sort of stands out as a unique piece. A 6-year-old girl here in the Chicago area. Nice sunny day, beautiful sky, blue, sun is out, let's go for a sled ride. Now, everyone else is, deportation and sadness, and she picked up on something. Well, these are human beings, and they were under difficult circumstances, but human beings will still find something to be happy about. And so she brought up that not everything was bad. This is the only really joyful picture in the exhibit. It's just sort of really nice. Essays were written about the subject, sent in from New York City, children, their own family history. And again, certain aspects of the exhibit, when you look at it, these are the photographs by Joseph Kazlauskas. And he died about 10 years ago, the photographer who was, spent 8 years in Siberia. And part of this is some of the pieces on exhibit. At this one point to point out is Hebrew. So being Jewish didn't protect you from being deported. These are some of his iconic images. And these are bones, caskets sticking out from the ground. When he started exhibiting these things in 1989, the Soviet authorities were so embarrassed to send out teams to clean things up, and so now these areas have been sterilized. And these are the individuals returning to the sites where they were deported. A president of Lithuania was deported. We have a display about that. That's by his granddaughter living here in Chicago. A book display, books in English about Siberian deportation. I included this not because it's so impressive, because it's so small. There's so few books about in English about the subject. And material that was brought back. She was a high school teacher in mathematics in the city where my parents grew up. And she was deported because of activities. I only have about 1 minute left. I'll just go very quickly. I won't really discuss these things very much. She's working on the Trans-Siberian Railroad here in a Gulag prison camp. Some of the artwork people did that she brought back. A rosary, and the beads are made of bread and on a string that she made herself. Little booklets, memoirs. This fellow was deported, and only a year later, a trial took place that made him guilty. He was a district attorney, prosecuted criminals, and he strengthened the bourgeois system, so that was his crime. 8 years of incarceration, a family that was deported. These are receipts for shipments of packages that people received. This is a notable one. A person was arrested in Lithuania, sent for 8 years of hard labor. And because he left Polish citizenship, and there was an agreement eventually to reestablish a Polish army after a year, he was able to escape, to leave as part of the Polish amnesty from Siberia. Menachem Begin, he was for 8 years the prime minister of Israel. So again, being Jewish didn't protect you from deportation and death. He would have, if he hadn't had a chance to leave, he would have died. And then there's the letters, and I'm just going to go over this very quickly, and just to the very end here. The exhibit and program continue until April 30th. On my website, there is a virtual tour of the exhibit, so that's going to be up. We have several YouTube videos. We'll have a lot of them. What's moving are the personal stories of people, and these things I've summarized on my blog, on my website, on Letters from Siberia. This website is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, internationally, and it's free of cost, so whenever you want to get some information about it, you can. We'll also have DVDs available and CDs of the letters and photographs, so that the effort is still going to continue and be available to people in the future. Well, thank you very much, and I wish you a very nice day.